Hello and welcome. My name is Maddie, and this is the next episode of Vocation. Once again, I'm very pleased to announce I'm joined by the great Michael Tesaurian, who's an occult historian and esoteric researcher and author. And we're going to be speaking about one of his books today regarding Atlantis, one of these occult topics that I've been quite fascinated by. And so maybe just to start us off, Michael, how are you doing this week? You keeping well?
Very well. Very well, Maddie. Nice to see you again and be here on the show. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And so I maybe even we'll just dive into it right away. Where and what was Atlantis?
Well, my angle when I wrote this was the subject of my first book, and normally it would be it was mentioned in I think it was the Timaeus or the Critias of Plato. Yes. I think it was the Timaeus, his famous book, and his books were all named after figures, people that he would meet in their houses, or they would be the ones to kick up the subject of the speech, that he would give. So the Timaeus, yeah, and it was this fabulous island. Now, in my work, being skeptical as hell, I've never been okay with the description from the Athenians. There's probably truth to it, but it never sat well with me. And the reason is because I had been already a student of pre-Celtic Irish mythology. And they have accounts of a homeland or multiple homelands in prehistoric times. You and I have even talked very briefly about the pre-Adamite or pre-Adamic world. So that's what they were talking about, that long, long before recorded history, there were these special homelands. And they're well known to the Irish, the land of eternal youth and various other sort of the fairy lands, as they're called. And I mentioned these in the book on Atlantis. And I come from that angle. But the thing was that rather than say that this mythical land was in the East, the legends of Ireland sort of contradict that totally and speak of it being more in the West or Northwest. And so this has to be reconciled. And then when you keep reading, you get talk of Hyperborea, Ultima Thule, right? Avalon, Hybrasil, all of these mythical islands. Lyonesse would be another one. All of these anecdotes, Arctos, Polaria, right? There's different names for the what was later known as the Arctic homeland. Can you believe that, right? No, we don't think about that because, of course, it's all covered in ice today. But they have discovered in Russia, of all places, in the deepest part of, the ice of Siberia, they've found all sorts of artifacts, tools, sophisticated tools that are at least 30,000 years old.
Wow.
So right away, that backs up the Irish legends and the Nordic legends. And, on Unslaved, we've done a lot of podcasts on Finnish mythology from the Finland, particularly stuff on what's known as the Bok saga. Maybe one day, you'll have a guest on to talk about that. And by God, they corroborate this. In fact, they talk about millions of years of human habitation. I mean, completely overturning the tables. But so does the Irish. And the box, that is a word that actually, when you know what you're reading, is not a million miles away from the word Bolg, which is an Irish tribe, an ancient Irish tribe. And I, for one, think they are the same word. But we've had a lot of myth-mongering and academic chicanery to make it, to fudge it and to make it look like there's no connection between those words. But Bolg or Balg and Bok, once pronounced in the original, would be very much the same people. And this could mean the goat people, or what was the proto-Goths. And one can get into it. But the thing is that this concept of the Arctic homeland speaks to me. Now, there is one confirmation of this in the Platonic record. In their account, they say that Atlantis is a fabulous island, they call it a continent, and I just think that's got to be scrubbed right away. That's definitely not the case, right? That's either a mistranslation or even a misunderstanding. So it's not a continent. but it was a large landmass. And they claim that it was to be found between the Pillars of Hercules. And this is where things went really wrong, because the Pillars of Hercules were said to be almost at the Straits of Gibraltar. And for centuries, basically, that's been accepted as a fact. And I just think it's ludicrous. So I'm a fan of the work of Comyns Beaumont. Maybe we'll have to talk about him a little bit too. Comyns Beaumont laughed that off. And he says that, look, in ancient times, whether it was Posidonius or any of these other travelers from Greece, they knew that the Pillars of Hercules were not at Gibraltar. All the original Greek seafaring mariner types, and travelers knew this. So how it got into the record, right, we don't know. And it's not, the main thing is it's false. The actual Pillars of Hercules, and you'll know this very well, is the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland.
That makes
Great
sense, doesn't
pillars
it?
of basalt, yeah. And what people don't realize is that across the Irish Sea in Scotland, exactly parallel the Giant's Causeway, are more of the same hexagonal basalt columns visible to anyone, any seafarers who made a regular sort of journeys in that area. Sometimes they'd be snug to the coast of Scotland, but sometimes they'd be more snug to the coast of Ireland. And either way, you saw the same pillars, because that's what they are. And in Irish mythology, the great hero, the great strong man, in other words, the Hercules of Ireland, is called Ugma, right? The strong one, the mighty one. So although there's a transliteration and transmogrification of the word to Hercules, everyone in the ancient world knew that each of these cultures had a Hercules, had a strong man. And so these were the Pillars of Ugma, the Pillars of Hercules. And everyone freaking knew it. But if Atlantis is connected with these pillars that, hundreds of thousands of tourists visit every year up there in Northern Ireland, right? Well, wait a minute. What's north of Northern Ireland? Bugger all. You get back to the Arctic. And you're back to the coast of Norway. Right where Hyperborea and places like that were meant to be. But if you go a little bit west, okay, then you're into Iceland and Greenland. But mostly you're up now in the Arctic Circle. So this then is the concept that I started to research. And I find out that there is a scholar way back in the 40s and 50s in India called Tilak, who wrote a book called The Arctic Homeland in the Vedas.
Right.
It's a treasure, right? Arctic Homeland in the Vedas, in which he comes at all of the sacred scriptures of India and shows that they are bogus, the way they've been presented. And he does it from analyzing their content, their actual content. And by doing that, he shows you that there's a great deal of reference in those books, in the Shastras. This would be, the Upanishads and the Vedas. And, those kinds of sacred texts of Puranas would be another one, right? But when you're scanning through these great tomes, there's a great deal of astronomical information. But what Tilak discovered was that you cannot see any of these aspects and constellational aspects from India, not even from the highest latitude in India. Yeah. So then how did these aspects, which are precisely described, get to be described? You couldn't have been living in India when you did. And also the amount of years it would take to notice some of these astrological alignments also seems to go against the official grain. So he, and there are other astronomers that, also found this out, by the way. These would be, people that one hasn't heard of anymore. But it was backed up. But his thesis was, no, the real observation point was far to the north, way up in the Arctic Circle. Yeah. And that the ancestors of the Indians came from there, as their own legends said they did. See, I'm believing in the Irish legends and I take them on faith. Well, this guy did exactly the same thing, long before my time. He said, these Indian legends tell you the truth. there was an Aryan, not invasion, but migration. And these were high adepts, which is what the word Arya in Indian means, by the way. It means enlightened ones, high adepts, noble ones, white ones, pure ones. And they came in with their cosmology, right? And cosmology, and they are the root race. They're the lost race that everything else is descended from. And their work, although a butchered form now, are these documents I just mentioned, these great scripts and texts. But of course, they've been butchered after years of mutilation, years of misinterpretation by the priests, by these bloody Brahmins and everybody else, right? Who kind of know the secret, but they keep it to themselves. In exactly the same way that thousands of miles away in Britain, you see, and then the Vatican plays a role here, because in something like, I think it was the 15th, 16th century, they invaded Finland and destroyed the box.
Right.
To a man. Yeah. And as Conor McDorry and other great men like Comyns Beaumont have shown, the same forces, that is, i.e. the Vatican, also came into Ireland and massacred almost the entire population. All of this has been bleached. You've got to know where to go to read this, and it's very, very controversial, but I deal with it in all my works, which makes them very different, right? So Comyns Beaumont is one of the most important people to read. You have Ignatius Donnelly, you have Conor McDorry, you have Anna Wilkes, and then you have myself, who's trying to modernize their work and show that many of the motifs and tropes come from the West, and that these Irish legends are not to be just dismissed as lunacy. There was something out in the Northwest. There were. And it's all written for those who have an open enough mind. Because even when you look out today into the off the west coast of Ireland, apparently there's nothing there right now. But obviously there's been speculation, and there's been many, many people in the modern world who've flown over the Atlantic at certain places and have seen underground ruins and what have you. But my theory is still that no, the original Atlantis, to answer your question, was above the Arctic Circle and was the great Arctic homeland. But does that make Plato and others wrong completely? No, I don't go that far, because after the destruction of the original Arctic homeland, those who had survived, and this was an incredibly cosmopolitan place when it was at its height. So then what happened was a kind of simulation started to take place, where this central paradisical place was replicated elsewhere, both in design and both as intent. So this is why you can go to the deepest, Guatemala or the Andes. You can go to the south of Spain. You can go to Angkor, and you can go to the Atlas Mountains in northern Africa, in various places where people say, I got it, I found it, it's Atlantis. No. These are not Atlantis original. These are Atlantis's the copy, because that's what ancient people did. They admired this place so much, and some of them were from there, right, had survived the cataclysm that destroyed the original antitype. And so what they obviously did was try to replicate, try to rebuild, maybe even Mohenjo-Daro in India and Harappa, these places that are immensely ancient. They also stretch back to 8,000 BC. Although there's been so many lies told about that, right? These are the great Indus Valley communities. They're all over the fucking place. So some of these places were sort of styled on or built on the original antitype, right? But when a new archaeologist who wants a budget comes along and finds some ruins, of course he's going to scream, I found Atlantis. And this has been going on for centuries. I can understand it. Because you even have people telling you that there's been incredible finds in the Grand Canyon area of America. Yeah, underground caverns and tombs and all of this thing. I go into this in the appendix section of my web. The Atlantis book has its own page, and that's where I put appendixes. And if people go to Appendix 1 and open that, they'll hear more information about everything we've just said. So I highly recommend that. But yeah, the idea is, for me anyway, I stick to it because that's what the Irish legends are saying. And just like Tilak held fast, you know, to the idea that the original Indian priest class and elite came from the far north, bringing their lore with them. So in the same way, yeah, I looked at those same climes, to Norway, to Sweden, to the northwest, to the Goths, to the original Nordics, you know, and to their prehistoric ancestors, and very much the same with Ireland, because Ireland, the very word, originally was Arya land, land of the Arya. So this is what I consider the true history of the world, the true history of Atlantis, but also the true history of the world. And there's been some very, very interesting disfigurement and chicanery that's been worked, through the years to cover this all up. And I must say, I was glad to see that in more recent times, there's a Norwegian geologist of the top level, very eminent, called Ulf Erlingsson, who wrote a book that people should get called Atlantis in Ireland.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'll check that
Now,
out.
I was
Yeah.
absolutely amazed to find this, that he's making use of the satellite photographs.
Mm,
And talking
very
about
interesting.
Cataclysm, it's a wonderful book, and it validates my thesis. It came out after I had published my work, but what a support. What an incredible supporting work there. And I just hope that people get it, because I don't want these great works to be forgotten.
Hello. If you've been enjoying this content once again, I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing and liking the video as well too. It'll really help me keep this journey going. Thank you again for your time, and back to the show. Yeah, super. And so what we're saying is there's this ancient civilization, it was destroyed. These people left and then started prototypes around the world. And sort of the history of that's been diluted over time. And this is why we get different fragments that sort of not all congeal together. But maybe even just take it back to the source here. Who were the Atlanteans? You'd mentioned the Aryans and this root race. Can you expand upon those topics a little bit?
Well, this is where you have to be very open-minded and come at it from. They were basically a priest class. Aryans, word Aryan does not mean a race. It means a caste. That's the first thing. And this caste then affected the entire world. They were known. In Ireland, they were known as the Druids. In Egypt, they were known as the Omanists. And every culture had them under different names. Small group. But they were immensely influential. So when you start thinking about the movement of races, you're already kind of moving away from the facts. It's understandable, but you're not really on target. It's not a race. They've always been stupid. They've always been brutal. They've always been, at each other's throats. You're talking about, just as it is in, say, a Native American Indian context, where you have the rest of the primitives, and you have within them the shaman, who's in touch with the cosmos, who's in touch with nature, right? Same thing we're talking about here.
And what are your thoughts on what happened to Atlantis then? You hear in some of the ancient legends that there might have been some sort of like major catastrophe that occurred, or a giant war, some sort of battle in the sky, or what's your understanding of what happened to Atlantis?
Yeah, that's another one where there's so many different stories. The story, as I tell it in my Atlantis book, is that there was a global war somewhere around 13,000 years from now, say about 12,000 something BC, and that's just approximate. There was something frightful that took place. And well, there's been lots of frightful things that have happened in the heavens. You and I have even done a program in the past called "From Heaven to Earth." But talking about comets and what have you. So our corner of the galaxy here, our solar system is not a restful place by any means. And I have another program coming up on Enslaved about this, Catastrophism Part 2. I hope people will check that out. It's coming up in the next few weeks, which will delve into this. But to stick to the destruction of Atlantis, I think that was Earth cataclysms, but this time it was it was the Earth responding to an all-out war, the famous War of the Gods, that is talked about in all the different records. Yeah. So something catastrophic happened, terrestrially, yes, in terms of the atmosphere, in terms of volcanic action and earthquakes. But this time, those were a byproduct of a ferocious war that and this is where one has to have a very open mind, what I'm saying next, that involved heavy-duty weaponry, which is also spoken about in the mythologies, by the way. So it's all there. You just have to read it. And flying craft and what have you. And the Bible talks about it, because I mention all the passages that do in my work. And other cultures speak about it. I have their, remarks in my book and in DVDs and things like that I did on this subject, right? But here we come back to Comyns Beaumont as well. Because the thing is, you see that there's one or two people out there that talk about Comyns Beaumont, but down through the years after his passing, no one ever talks about this part of his work, what I'll be talking to you about right now. They talk about his work on catastrophism. They certainly talk a little bit about his work on comets. You do get all of that. But they never speak, for some fucking reason, I'm the only one who talks about the teraphim. And Beaumont's teraphim alludes to heavy-duty weaponry that was used in Britain, right? It was kept by a branch of the Druidic order, and they were known as the Pyralt. It's a Welsh word, Pyralt, P-E-R-Y-L-L-T, the Pyralt, right? Although the original pronunciation, who the hell knows, right?
Yeah.
Well, Tolkien seems to know all about them, because he speaks about the great underground caverns where the dwarves, as he calls them, right, were hammering away and forging away the great swords, right, the great elven breastplates and the armory, all of which had special power that only the king could, utilize, and all the rest of it, these incredible artifacts. Well, he's talking about this group, by the way. But Beaumont is the one who says these things had a lot of power. They would rival cannon like we have today. They would rival things that, shot projectiles, and they were pretty fearsome. Even handguns, that's what the teraphim were. But this was the most secretive science of the age. And it really was only known to a handful. And they preserved the secrets under a pain of death. That's why it didn't get abroad. That's why for centuries, the knowledge was so secretly guarded that it just didn't get abroad. Because, of course, the last thing you want to do is have your enemy learn about how you're blasting them to kingdom come. And say the walls of Jericho, right? Beaumont claims that the walls of Jericho and other things like that were destroyed using these power weapons. They were also sound-oriented, sonic in form. All of this was going on. And this is why you find all of this in the ancient legends. Spears that can fly on their own, and Baelor's evil eye. Everybody's had these dramatic tales. Lugh with his great sling and great lance and great sword of the High King Nada, right? So you get all of these anecdotes. But Beaumont is saying it existed. But the thing for us to understand is it was very, very closely guarded. And this is why, one of the reasons, for instance, why the Romans never conquered Ireland. Now, you'd think here is one of the most conquestive, acquisitive, aggressive, and ambitious people on the planet. Just think about what they conquered and how they did it. And they get to Britain, but they hardly touch Wales and they hardly touch Ireland. And there's no historian can properly explain that. The reasons that they give are fairly ludicrous. But Beaumont can explain it, right? Because the Romans knew you don't fuck with the people in Ireland. They'll blow us to kingdom come. They'll blow our ships out of the water. They're too dangerous.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, that's why they never came. Now, things, of course, changed later on. But at the original time of the conquest, this little island of Ireland, yeah, it was considered a sacred land, and you're not going to get your hands on the weapons no matter what. In fact, you'll not get your hands on it. You will be blown to smithereens if you try it.
You'll be on the other end.
You'll be on the other end of it, because this comes from the ancient Atlantis. This doesn't come from where we think. These are part of the 13 treasures of Britain and the 4 great treasures of Ireland, and the ancients knew it. So stay the hands off. Now, of course, things changed later on, as Comyns Beaumont says, but I'm just want to speak about this. Eventually, other tribes did learn or even some Judases sold it out, and the balance of power changed. Okay, great. But nobody wants to speak about this theory of Beaumont, but it makes a lot of sense when you get into it. Now, back to the point about catastrophe. So the use of these weapons and more caused an eruption of the Earth. And that's how then the great Atlantis fell. Partly human, partly natural, in terms, but it was a catastrophe that shook the world. And the Arctic homeland crashed, fell into ruins. That was known as the original Paradiso, the original walled garden. Hesperides, Avalon, what other, there's plenty of other, Elysian fields. Yeah. It's been referred to Dilmun. The Babylonians call it Dilmun. The Sumerians did, right? And so it was a prototype. And so everywhere you went, you've heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, right? You've seen the terraces in the Andes. All the later races said, when we build something, we'll build something to commemorate the great Arctic homeland. Because
Right.
Quetzalcoatl, a blonde, blue-eyed god who came to visit the southern, you've got these ruins in Tikal, in Palenque. The idea was to build central pyramids, central ziggurats, compounds that resembled or in some way recalled that lost Arctic homeland. And we would all know about it, except that we have the Smithsonian, and we have MIT, and we have, whatever, all of these stinking lying orgs that have completely, and people, if they actually want to know more about this, see, there's been discoveries, underground cities, underground tunnels from Guatemala to Tikal, like I said, Palenque. They've been found in Ireland. They've been found in southern Spain. They've been found in the Golan Heights. They've been found in Turkey, especially there, because there was a great Aryan civilization there, one that nobody ever wants to talk about. And so I've got information all on that on the Atlantis page of the website in the first appendix. People can read it and be shocked how the Smithsonian, specifically them, but others orgs as well, have systematically, hidden this information, boxed it up, just like you see at the end of Indiana Jones movie, boxed it up, stuck it in the warehouse, or labeled it hoax. And even though very eminent other, scholars said, no, these are not hoaxes. These are all true. They just silence those people. They don't give them any time. They stop publishing their work and what have you. It's a real crisis. These are terrifically evil orgs, terrifically evil. And they've covered up all this stuff about giantism. They've covered up all these things about the antiquities, the artifacts, the elongated skulls. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I'm no big fan of Ancient Aliens or any of those silly programs, but at least if somebody comes to us, even those shows, bad as they are, can show a novice what the hell has been going on our planet. And then if hopefully they'll kick off and, go and get into detail. And I have always said from the beginning of my career, start with your own people, start with your own ancestry, wherever you're from, right? Go in. If you're from Sardinia, do you know the history of that place? Unbelievable. Turkey, I don't care where you're from, India, right? Wherever you're from, even in China. In China, they found artifacts in layers of the earth. These are tools, sophisticated tools, again, 30 to 100,000 years old, right? They found in India, in northern Russia, a thing called the Ural slab. It's almost 1 million years old, and it has pictograms on it that they can't explain.
Real.
Yeah, people can look in that document I just mentioned, Appendix 1, and there's a lot of information on the Ural slab and these finds in China. Nobody knows what to do with it. Right? Then you have the Bosnian pyramid. I mean, and not only that, but a valley of pyramids in Bosnia. Not just the one that got the news. No, whole valleys of pyramids have been found.
Mm.
You see?
Yeah.
So we're dealing with lies, terrible, terrible lies, and that's why I don't wholly believe the Platonic idea. See, in this web of lies, If there's a story that they let leak through that becomes more public and more popular and is reiterated again and again and again, you already got to doubt that.
I no doubt.
It's the distraction. It's the red
Yeah.
herring. Yeah. Not all fault, because you have to pepper it with certain truths.
Mm-hmm.
But the very fact that it's the one that everybody knows and is constantly wheeled out again and again, you got to know. Do you think they want to know where the Arya really come from about the Arctic homeland? That is super secret. They didn't think the science would even exist, to talk about the land bridges and all of it. But it does now. But they don't want it leaking out, so they just wheel out the Platonic thing over and over again.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's no doubt like our ancient history has been totally rewritten. Like anybody who's been to some of these ancient megalithic sites, the mainstream historian line about it is totally ridiculous. And people can check out. There's a new episode coming up with Ralph regarding the celestial dating of the Giza pyramids. And again, that'll put it to bed for anybody that sort of wants to understand that the idea that these are just a couple thousand years old, like 4,000 or 5,000, is just totally silly. Same with some of the other megalithic sites, even in the UK, like Avebury is another one with it. Same with Stonehenge. I've actually been to the one in Tikal you're mentioning in Guatemala. I like those little pyramids. The idea that just hunter gatherers made them is ridiculous. You can actually stand in them. There's 3 different pyramids. This is out in the open, and in the very center of them is a little stone. And if you stand on this stone, and again you're out in an open field, surrounded by 3 big pyramids, and if you clap your hands, it makes the sound resonate and creates a bird call of the national bird. And you go, how do they make the acoustics of this out in the open, a bouncing sound off pyramids to make a bird call? These aren't stupid, idiotic people that were just, hunt a big animal, and shoot that down, and that was all there was to it. And so, yeah.
And the key thing that Ralph brings out when it comes to Avebury that backs up my theories is that if you use precessional time, Avebury can be up to 60,000 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, Stonehenge too. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's a possibility, and he's open to it. So am I. Again, to push back the dates, because there's been something going on. But the one thing to realize is that these cultures didn't just build it in the time frame that we know about. When Tilak is talking about the Arctic homeland, he's talking about something that goes back at least that. Yeah, because the herbalism alone, the sophisticated weaponry, right? The mapping of the heavens, you see,
exactly.
and other skills that they had, that's not learned overnight. Pyramid building, mathematics, hieroglyphics, the building of these sarcophagi that you find in the Serapeum, and on you could go. And this is even the case in Ireland with Newgrange and Knowth and Douth and hundreds of other megaliths. Of course, they've tried to destroy as many of them as they can, the thousands that used to be there, and the traditions, the religion behind it. So by the time that the Romans are even getting to Britain, the Druids are not the Druids anymore. They're at the weakest part. They held on for dear life, but then they get wiped out. Yeah, because they're already wiped out. This is not the Druids at their high point. This is the Druids at their lowest point. The Arctic homeland has long been destroyed. Ireland was, a satellite land. Let's call it that, right? But even the groups there had been warring with one another. The story of the Gaels is nothing but a fight to the death, you see. So by this time, the geopolitics, the Druids were on their last legs. They were ready to die off anyway. And with them went incredible amount of lore. And we're just living in the ruins and the relics. We've talked about this before, right? The pre-Adamite world also went through its own catastrophe from a gnosis point of view. And all of that was lost. And that's why people can go to Newgrange, Stonehenge, Avebury, Carnac, Glastonbury, Silbury Hill, and just look at it and go, yeah, how did they manage to do that? And like you say, Tikal, how the hell did they manage all of that? And then later groups come, park themselves on there, only to tell us, well, we didn't build it. You found us here, but we don't have a faintest idea who built it. We call them the ancestors. We call them the golden ones, the blue-eyed blonde ones. Nobody listens. All over the world, it's the same refrain, and nobody listens.
You've mentioned Comyns Beaumont a few times. I'm not familiar with him. Can you give me a little bit more information about who he is, where he's from, maybe, and a little bit more about his research, if that's all right?
Well, he's the most important person probably in my work, my take. He was a Fleet Street journalist by day, but he was an absolute expert on archaeology and geography, by night, so to speak, his other job, But he was an expert in England and Britain, and every single headland, every single estuary, every single major town and city, he knew it intimately inside out, empirically, right around all the coastlines, all the lakes. And he gained controversy, of course, not only for a book called The Mysterious Comet, which is a must read, but he also said something unthinkable. And that is that the entire New Testament and a great deal of the Old Testament didn't even happen in the Middle East in the places that claims to have been made. Because he says when you go there, there's no archaeological evidence that any of this stuff ever happened, because it didn't. He claims that the vast majority of the famous incidences that you read about in the Old Testament and the New actually happened in Britain. Yeah. And that Jerusalem was originally Edinburgh, what's now known as Edinburgh. And so his works then have to walk you through this. So he wrote a book called The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain, and others, which just blew me away. When I was a young person, I had books that I found out this guy's name from the back of these books in the bibliography. I would always study bibliographies of books that were brought to me from America or somewhere like that. And I would not only read the book, but I'd look at the sources at the back. And I kept seeing this name, Comyns Beaumont, The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain, and Britain, the Key to World History. And it just intrigued me. And it took I held on to that for over 20 years before I actually got to America, because you couldn't find anything like that in Britain at the time, back in the 70s and 80s. I had to wait till I got to America. And then I found publishers in America that did have these books. So I started collecting them, as copies, right? Facsimiles. And plowed through them. Found it quite difficult because he writes in a kind of an odd way, but I persisted. And then I found Conor McDowry, who's another one who was the same thing. So yeah, same thing found in bibliographies, extraordinary titles, like the Bible is an Irish book. Yeah, I think I would want to read that, right?
Yeah.
And then I found Anna Wilkes. So I've been collecting and espousing these people's work from way back in the 90s, found out nobody wants to listen. But when the internet came along, then I started slowly creating my websites, and featuring quotes from these people. And it's just been since then, continuing. Then finally I wrote my Atlantis book that tried to do a bit more justice. But I wanted to also tell it in a kind of a fiction, but faction as well, tell a story. Because you see, since I had been steeped in the mythologies, that's very right brain anyway. So I wanted to write my book like a myth, like an opening of a saga or a myth that also did justice to the mythical aspect, while at the same time putting in the facts that people might follow in this kind of a creative way. And I was very happy with the way it turned out. But mostly my personal satisfaction was to try and bring the work of these geniuses that we just talked about back into the mainstream. So that was my main reason for doing any kind of websites, any kind of books. And by the way, I think it's chapter 21 in my Irish Origins of Civilization that I finally, it might even be chapter 20. I have a whole chapter on Comyns Beaumont. And believe you me, when I finished that, I felt like, oh yeah, how long has it been? How long has it been? What a hell of a journey, wrote a chapter in a couple of weeks, but it took 30 years to write. So I was very satisfied with that chapter. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. And when I hear about Atlantis, there's also this angle of extraterrestrials or aliens are involved. How does that sort of come into this Atlantean myth or story that that you're familiar with?
Well, just simply again, because it's part of the mythology. Whenever you go to any of these ancient peoples and they say things like, we didn't build this, often, not all the time, but a great many times they talk about off-world beings, So there's a two-pronged thing. They'll always talk about blondes and blue-eyed giants. Yes, and that's fascinating enough. And that leads in one direction. But then they also talk about visitation from other planets. And I strongly believe that this actually occurred. I take this very seriously. You and I have talked about this before. Remember when we talked about the pre-Adamite world?
Yes.
The idea is that our planet was visited all the time by beings from other planets, but that after certain devolution took place, this visitation sort of ceased. And when certain alien beings continued to visit, they were shocked to find out what happened to our friends. What happened to the people who used to greet us and knew how to greet us? Where are they all gone? But after the catastrophe, they were left with us. Right? And even today, here we go around in our little metal boxes, driving around, right? Thick as shit. So the alien visitations, the ones that continued, then they wanted to visit the planet, but they sure as hell didn't want to run into us. So they stayed way, way, way the fuck away from us, even now. They come down for their own reasons. Nobody knows what the hell, why, but they certainly don't come to be visiting us openly. Now, we might still see them, people, in the farms, and obviously you do get these eyewitness accounts.
Yes.
But these are absolutely anomalous. These are purely accidental. The beings are horrified by what they found on this planet in the post-Adamic eras. They want nothing to do with us at all. Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing at all. But before, it was totally different. We were visited continually. And the Native American Indian tribes always tell you about it.
Right.
But to be more specific about it, that's why they had priesthoods. Because you, Joe, in your wigwam, didn't meet these beings. These beings would come, right, to a certain location, and the priest, what later became a shaman or a priest, would go out to meet them with a lot of ceremony involved. Yeah, a lot of what we would now recognize as Masonic rituals was involved in this. So the average Joe, even back then, the average Joe did not meet with any of these beings. You only saw them from afar. And this is the case whether it was in Ireland, North America, South America, or Egypt. It was just disrespect. So what we know as a priesthood grew up for exactly this reason. That's exactly the origin of the priests. Women were also involved in it. You and I have talked about that as well a bit. And the idea was that a certain amount of breeding could even take place, between these, what would be spoken of as the gods, the divine beings, and earth women. We get that as well, by the way. But to answer your question more specifically, these beings helped build these great temple structures in the ancient world that still stand. Some of them 60,000 years old, much, much older than, and Ralph has found out this. Ralph is very good work because he's discovered this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they helped with all the civilization before this catastrophe, and it was a commerce, let's just put it that way, a big commerce between these people. But I opened my Atlantis book with one of the last visitations, one of the last major ones anyway, let's put it that way. And I tell that whole story. It'd be too elaborate to go into now, but I tell a story of how this planet was occupied by a group of aliens who were not so positive. And that they, in fact, set up a colony, right, that has been called Atlantis, and set up doing genetic manipulation. Yeah. Over many hundreds, if not even thousands of years, this was going on. And as the ancient legends say, as these ancient codexes of Mexico and places like that talk about the epic of creation and what have you, they speak about the fact that this race, being small, wanted servants. And Zachariah Sitchin picks up on this in his great work, Erich von Daniken. But the thing is that there's two schools. These aliens, when they came down and formed their colonies, most of the researchers in this movement think of them as positive, think of them as great space brothers. Some of them think, they're on their way back to help us. And that certainly back then, they get confused and say, these were elders, and they meant well, and they were the great benefactors. See, I don't take that tack. I've just told you that there were races who visited and were that. Yes, I admit, but not this group that I talk about. So this is what makes my work very different. This group did not mean well and wanted to enslave the earth. Yeah, and this is why you've got to back engineer through history why we are who we are today, There's a direct line, because in this genetic manipulation that I'm talking about, they crossed their own DNA with what they found here of the Aboriginal people, our ancestors, and made us. But they did that in a couple of stages, so it's not just quite as simple. They made at least two types, and this caused a lot of meltdown, because the first being that they made wouldn't submit. Yeah, but that race then moved to the continent of Lemuria. They were hybrid. They were part alien, part humanoid, but they set up their own civilization elsewhere. Now, in the in the pre-Celtic Irish mythology, you have one of the great lost islands. It was called Murias, the motherland of humanity, Murias. What else can that be than Lemuria, with the L, like it is in French, being the.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the ancient legends talk about this and very accurate. So they went back to the drawing board after these rebellious first beings that they created, that I call the sons of the serpent, wouldn't serve them. So they just went, look, we'll go back and experiment again and dumb them down even more. And this second race that was created they were successful. They're the Adamic race, both men and women. And that's our ancestors that served the gods. And basically, in one form or another, have been doing exactly that all the way through.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very brief introduction to my theories on it. But the thing is that this is what the dynamic has been for thousands and thousands of years. So I reject all the other scholars who think of these alien visitors as being something benign. That is a very naive, and that's not why that's not why we had the Age of Catastrophe. That's not why we have all of these horrific empires, and we have so little good in the world, right? I don't accept that. Never have, never will. So I wanted to express it. But I also wanted to bring all of these other threads together. Like I said, Ignatius Donnelly, Comyns Beaumont, Conor McDowry. How are you going to do justice to all of that with this story? So that's what I've been working on for the last 30 years, how to put that together. So Atlantis book, the Irish origins of civilization. We're telling this extraordinary tale and trying to explain it in my own way, because I'm one who read all of these other people, but I've got sort of certain problems, with their different theories.
Where else is Lemuria mentioned? I'm not familiar with it. Again, Atlantis is in Plato. Is Lemuria mentioned somewhere else, or is that just from ancient mythology also?
Yeah, the expert on that. Well, actually, Helena Blavatsky talked about it.
But famous occultist.
Yeah, that's right. She talked a lot about all of these things. She talked a lot about Atlantis and all this, but I think she might have been referring to Sir James, I think it was Colonel James Churchward. And I have a page on him on my astrotheologyzone.com website. James Churchward, an amazing thinker who wrote the book The Lost Continent of Mu, which he situates more in Indonesia, Micronesia, Oceania. This would be more in the Indian Ocean. Yeah. And that could be. I mean, it's very plausible. I haven't looked into it that much, but it certainly was another continent. The Irish do talk about it. The ancient Irish legends also talk about it. And that it was a destroyed land. It was another land that was lost to time.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have the ancient Atlantis then. We have the Atlanteans. We had this visitation from different other races or aliens or extraterrestrials over time. You mentioned there were different factions of them. One faction tried to create a servant class, as you're describing. Part of them didn't work the first time. These are the ones that went up to Lemuria. Then you had the next race, which is, I think what you're alluding to is us, who were created. And was it a rebellion of the previous race against these ones? Was the battle of the gods? This was what this war was about. There was a rebellion? Is that from the original ones?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Because it's when the second race of Adamic race was sent into the garden, right? The idea was into the world to mine and to look after the animals and to plant and to slave and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
This was observed from afar by the first hybrid race, the sons of the serpent. And of course, having freed themselves, they were horrified to find out that a new slave race had been created and that was in servitude. So they sent agents to meet with this race to try and awaken them and say, look, you don't need to be doing this. We are your elders, but you need to rebel like we did. Right? And I talk about that in the Atlantis book and how difficult it was. But finally, it kind of worked. And when the original visitors found out that this had been going on and that their own second creation of slaves had been seduced away to Lemuria, or at least out of Atlantis, all hell broke loose. But their ferocity was so great, they overdid it. And the other side was highly technical as well. So this extraordinary war of the gods took place that is, as I say, recorded in many, many chronicles. Many of these got, hidden away by groups like the Smithsonian, as I say, many of the institutions, and of course the Vatican. They've grabbed these records, they've purged and burned and purged and burned. Right? So a lot of it's lost, but we still have records. And this war of the gods took place. And I believe it was a very real one, a very real one. I trust the records. I believe them. I believe the indigenous people when they talk about it. But the one thing that a lot of them don't get is that this war was so ferocious that it tilted the polar axis. It shook the shit out of the world, yeah, and caused unimaginable tumult. We'd have massive tidal waves, all of that kind of thing, And so this was then the reason why any kind of resolution to this ancient war between the good and the evil never got resolved. The Earth catastrophe I'm talking about was a variable that prevented one side or the other winning.
Right.
And I argue this in the Atlantis book, because if the evil side had won, you and I wouldn't be sitting here with this conversation. We'd be fucking chained up somewhere working in a bloody quarry.
Mm.
And if the good guys had won, what the hell? Our whole world would be just one of peace and love. Long time ago, the good would have won. But neither of these two things have happened. And you gotta say, why not? Why has resolution been prevented? Well, it's been prevented because of something that happened that neither side in the conflict could have predicted. The Earth itself reacting so violently, that it cost the lives of millions and millions of people and millions of species. And I go into detail in this in the Atlantis book and in my DVD on Atlantis. It's absolutely horrific. And, the experts in science who know about it, they can't answer it to this day. But I cite all their works, and I cite other theorists who have, similar theories that I do. I do justice to them so that my readers can say, well, Tsarion, okay, I got your thing, but I like these other guys too. Thanks for referring, me to these other thinkers. They've got a different take. So I try to do justice. I just provide the information for people to work out and see what's going on and encourage them to get into the mythologies of their own culture. So if you're Spanish or you're Scots, right, or wherever you come from, it's go and talk to the ancients of your culture and see what they have to say, and you'll be absolutely amazed about how often they're talking about magical weapons and wands, powerful weapons, right, powerful artifacts, enlightened beings, fighting evil beings, dragon beings, serpent beings, right, who often live under the earth, and all of this. It's in every culture. And for God's sake, don't put it down as being just, fiction. Don't do that.
Yeah.
No, you can't do that. That's spitting on the face of your ancestors.
Mm. And do you still see these two groups are around and hidden, or I guess underground, or in some other places within the earth, keeping as a secret, or
No.
what's your sort of take on that?
No, I think we're all hybrids.
It's all
Yeah,
diluted over time, over the centuries.
I don't hold that there's any originals left. They're all dead now, or buried in some kind of the most I'll concede is that some of those ancient leaders of the Nephilim might be in suspended animation below the ground. Or let's say that their DNA has been kept. and that DNA could easily be, reconstituted. We wouldn't want that. I'll tell you one thing right now, it better not be. I hope I'm terribly wrong, But the thing is, no, for the most part, we're lumbered with it. It's morphed, and it's a case of each individual today having both the good and the bad in them subjectively. This is where the real problem is, the hybridization. Yeah. The other thing's interesting and could be true, but the real problem of human being, of humanity, is that we are schizoid beings. There's been this fusing together, in the experiment.
Yeah.
And in the Atlantis book, I also talk about the fact that animals on this planet were taken and crossed with alien DNA as well.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's why mythology is filled with beings like centaurs and unicorns and sirens and dragons. That's also not to be taken as just total mythology. No, all sorts of other crazy beings were created for all sorts of practical reasons, to move great logs, to fell great trees, to move rocks and mountains, to help in building and construction. There's all sorts of things going on our planet that nobody could even believe. But basically, the upshot is that they needed a workforce because they've been thrown out of their own planet. They had no mercy. They were looking for another home. They found it. And they might have even found it in the state of turmoil. We don't know. Or they might have just brought the turmoil. Nobody can tell. But one way or another is they took over. And they immediately started these experimentations, and this is where things went wrong. They were opposed, and everything would have been sorted one way or the other, as I said, but it wasn't. The destruction that they wreaked, did something to our planet, and therefore we have these catastrophes, probably the ones around 12,000 years BC, because they seem to be very, very significant. But that's not to say that there weren't other ones. Yeah. But something very, very strange happened about 12,000, 13,000 years ago. And this might have been key to the opening of what even regular academic scholars say something really strange happened about, they can say 7,000, 9,000, where you start to see these new civilizations being created. And many of the things that the elements of civilization seem to be coming online around that time, or shortly after, things like writing and what have you. So again, everyone can speculate. What I try to do is present programs. We've got Catastrophism 1, and we're going to do part 2 soon. And that's just to present people with all of the facts so that they can decide for themselves. Because you'll find that no two writers really agree on some of these points. And for good reason, because there are so many catastrophes. I mean, it's just unbelievable. On this Catastrophism 2, I'll be bringing that up to make it really, really clear to people what you're dealing with here. If it was only 1 or 2 catastrophes, we'd be okay. Yeah. But every culture, just go to Norway and ask the geologists in Norway, hey, how did the fjords get? They go, oh, don't ask. Off the coast of southern Spain, they found buildings under the ocean that look exactly like Plato's description of Atlantis. And of course, they all do think it is Atlantis because, as I said, they want the budget, they want the fame. The National Geographic front cover, yeah, we found it. No. You found a replica, you dumbasses.
I see.
But they don't get that part.
Was it Llyod Pye wrote a bit about this on the genetic manipulation? I believe he was working on that. Is that right? Yeah.
I'm not sure. I love Lloyd's work. I think he was a great researcher, and I knew him personally. He did the Star Child skull.
Right.
And he was one of the first people to shake my hand and welcome me into the movement.
Ah, right. Yeah, interesting.
He was a great guy because he was open to new thought. He wasn't closed-minded because, hey, we've been here for 30 years. Go back to Belfast. Shut up. No, he was very welcoming. Not all of them were, by the way. Not all were. But I always name the ones. Richard Hoagland was good to me. Llyod Pye was good to me. Dr. Roger Lear was good to me, right? I'll never forget the ones who welcomed me in. And even though these people, Jim Mars, all of these people that had their own theories, but they were open-minded enough to say, we don't know. See, this is very important because you meet a
I
lot of other
respect that.
fuckers who've got their theory, and it's like, that's it. It's nailed down. Nobody else can speak. So when I came in and said that these Atlanteans were not good or positive, it's not the great homeland. It's not the great homeland that had been taken over, that had been ruined. They should have said, well, then you got to leave. We can't listen to your message because that's not the message of, Bramley. Sorry, it is the message of Bramley, but it's not the message of Zachariah Sitchin and many others, right? So we can't accept this. No, we like it better to say that any kind of aliens are positive beings that are waiting and watching and ready to save us, you see, from the terrible New World Order of this prison planet. And when I came along with my message, restoring this alternative view, I could have been met with a lot of resistance. And I'll tell you something. No, I wasn't. I was welcomed in, and there was no reason to be welcomed in. I would get up on stage and say things that contradicted everybody else on the panel. And yet all of them said, welcome.
Fair play.
Great. Yeah, come over to me later and shake hands. Goes, very interesting theories, mate. Yeah, that reminds me of this. Or, and I had great conversations. There was no hostility in this movement. So that encouraged me to continue. If I'd have been met with too much hostility, non-stop hostility, I would have just given up.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I must give 5 stars to the American scholars who welcomed me, Anthony J. Hilder. I mean, the list goes on of all the ones that were very welcoming and very encouraging. And if they didn't believe what I said, they kept it to themselves. They were open to having alternative views, by the way. And that was really, really great.
Yeah, it's a good sign of where you're looking for the truth, where there's openness,
Right.
It's the opposite of that is where you're not going to find it. Yeah, of course, which is what the current academic institutions are like. Yeah, so
that's right. No, you don't get that anymore, right? You didn't get it even then. So to find myself at the right place at the right time, where my little message was being accepted, spurred me on, So then I moved to the next step and got a book out, got a DVDs, a presentation. I was kind of encouraged. Which I wouldn't have been if it was too much resistance. I would have just said, okay, whatever, Believe you me, I did get some resistance from some people, and I remember, and also some people nick my ideas without credit. You always get that. But for the most part, it was positive enough to keep me going.
Yeah, fair play. And so, what's the occult angle with this? What's the angle with secret societies and with Atlantis? Is there this idea of hidden knowledge that hasn't passed on through these? Or you mentioned H.P. Blavatsky had wrote about it extensively as well also. Can you expand a little bit about what, as an occult historian, what they write about regarding this?
Yeah, well, here's where the Vatican comes in. When they said things like, oh, you're disallowed, you cannot sail to the far west because you'll fall off the edge of the world. This is where it starts and ends. They didn't want anyone knowing about the Irish and the role of Britain. So they scared the bejesus. Then they sent their troops in and they annihilated most of the country. The Druids were wiped out finally by the Romans, right? After a period of time, they were undermined because they were already weakened anyway through things, a long period of changes that we haven't had time to speak about. But by the time that we get to the Roman invasions, they were already weakened. Sort of by the time, by the time that Christianity was coming in, it was over. But the conspiratorial aspect is that, number one, hide the movement of the Arya, because you don't want to be showing the connection between the Irish Arya and the Egyptian Amonists. That's one huge one, right? There can't be any connection, even though there was a deep one, and even with Turkey, Anatolia, and other areas as well. The Scythians, for instance, or Scythians, if you want to call them that, right? All of those things that Beaumont goes into, all of that had to be systematically hidden because it overturns what we know. Then this alien intervention, that is taboo. The aliens control the planet, right? Yeah. The ones who are, remember I said that human beings have both the DNA of the alien and the human. Well, in some people, the alien DNA is much stronger than the human DNA, and they're the ones then who run the secret societies, right? They are
I
the ones
see.
who have the monopoly on knowledge, yeah, and they've set up their institutions to basically continue subjugating the rest of us mentally.
Is this the ancient bloodlines, this
Yeah,
matriarchal
that's right.
female Illuminati? Is that
Yes,
what you see it as?
yes,
These are the people carrying on with this type of DNA
no
or this
doubt
sort of
about it.
legacy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt about it. And so one thing that they've set their minds to is to conceal the history of our planet, which is far wilder and far more bizarre. Like I talked about these underground tunnels and underground cities, right? Just people just read through that document. It's only 40 pages, the appendix one, and you'll see what I
Hmm.
mean.
Yeah.
Just that alone. We're not even talking about going to John Keel, his great book, Our Haunted Planet, or his follow-up, The Eighth Tower, or Colin Wilson's The Occult. Read any one of those, let alone 3, you'll know what I'm talking about. This planet, oh my goodness. And so you see, I had read all of this work and more. I'm reading the William Bramleys, and I'm thinking, right, if you're then going to want to comment on this, make some remarks, write your own book, you've got to have a theory that covers it all. Right, Zacharias Sitchin over here, Brinsley the Poor Trench over there, Eric van den Eyck and the best of, right? You've got to be able to have something that encompasses it all, and also try to address the parts where they may have got it wildly wrong, or at least some parts where that's wrong. So that's what I was
Hmm.
trying to do. I tried to compose my work to do all of that, and I think I succeeded. That's why I haven't really changed that book. I haven't had to update anything substantially, right? It's exactly as I wanted it to be. It states the case very, very well, and even brings up things we haven't had time to talk about. You know, but I wanted to do justice to the science of catastrophe for people who've never heard of it. There's people living today who buy this academic uniformitarianism idea or this Darwinian slow, evolution number,
Hmm.
or geologically uniformitarianism, as it's called, slow changes over vast, vast periods of time. Things like the Pleistocene epoch, or say the Ice Age, right? We've been taught a lot of bunk about every part of it. One day you'll have Ralph Ellis on talking about climate gate, right? He's got theories on climate.
We just recorded it. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
you
yeah,
did?
yeah. So
Okay, great.
it's coming out soon as
Right.
well. Yeah,
So
yeah.
and that's only a microscopic example of what I'm talking about, right? There's been lies on a colossal level about our history, going back even more than that. Yeah. So no, you see, there's no question in my mind that there's a hidden hand of control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And its first target is, well, its first target is our own biology, our own psyche, our own psychosoma. That's where the first lies are told, who we are as beings. And the second one is world history. They've got those two things like a yo-yo. That's why
Yeah.
they've set up their institutions to lead us very far away from the truth. And that's why it takes, people like ourselves to do 30, 40 years of research to even try to find out what's going on. So my books are that. They're trying to help people along. They don't expound
Hmm.
one dogma. That's no good. But they present a whole series of facts gleaned from all of these different sources. And then when there's leftover material in the book, I put it in now, because of the age of the websites, I find them
Hmm.
valuable because instead of stuffing the books into thousands of pages, the website were the place where you could, put all the appendix pages. So for every one book I've written, there's really 3 books in one. But, yeah, I had to draw a line, say, okay, enough of this in the book form. Let's put the rest online. It's free. People can go there and, you know, study those documents and be intrigued. And pretty much all my websites have that. I've got 12 websites, used to have about 14. Now there's about 12. And they all feature these, extended, or at least the main websites, Astrotheology, Irish Origins, Atlantis,
Yeah. Yeah.
I make sure that there's plenty of backup material. And I'm
Hmm.
always updating it. Always
Hmm.
updating these websites, Female Illuminati for sure. Lots of extras, so people don't have to take my word for it. They can go there and see the scope of what we're talking about. Because unfortunately, our education systems are fucking worthless. And the teachers, you forget it, right? They are just the
I
monstrous
understand.
slaves. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, it's
It's the,
horrendous, the kind of
yeah, the
territorialization
propaganda.
of knowledge, yeah. And the
Hmm.
history of suppression. The reason why you haven't heard of Comyns Beaumont or any of these people I mentioned, the world hasn't heard of them. Yeah, guess why? Guess fucking why, right? So for every one of those great men, those great geniuses, right?
Hmm.
Tilak, others, you've got some ponce sitting up there in the Smithsonian or the National Geographic or the BBC, and all these other orgs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you mean.
Look what they've done to
And
Ralph. Look what they've done to Ralph Ellis alone.
it's unbelievable. Yeah, yeah. We have another episode coming out about his cancellation, so people should check that out with it.
Definitely.
It's an interesting story. He got banned from every the biggest book publisher in the world.
That's
It's
right.
a crazy story. People
Yeah,
stealing his work.
they come after
Yeah,
you. They come after me. They have. Yeah.
yeah,
I know exactly how they work. Oh yeah. I don't. Yeah. I don't want to get into it, but there's dangers. There's lots of dangers,
yeah.
and that's why I prefer to self-publish. And do it the
Fair
way we're
play.
doing it now. YouTube, I've
Yeah,
been
yeah.
banned from that for years and years. Could even
Mm,
tell you amazing stories about all of that, and amazing
yeah.
stories of who's tried to contact me and why. It's a really interesting thing, actually. But
Would
yeah,
you be open to doing a separate episode just about sort of your cancellation, so to speak, and sort of the journey of the censorship that you've been going through with maybe weird context, or
well,
you rather just
it's
keep
not
that off
something I
the
really like to talk about.
yeah, fair play, no
But I will
worries.
tell you, this has happened. You do get these
Hmm.
issues and problems. See, I just prefer that the focus is on the work.
Aye,
You
fair
know,
play, mate.
but I will tell you that it's pretty deadly. What kind of scavengers you've got to deal with? Number one, what kind of
Hmm.
disinformationalists? What kind of trolls?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure most people listening to me know exactly what I'm talking about. But there's
Hmm.
lots of other things. There's lots of cancellations, deplatforming. I've been
Hmm.
really through it. I was one of the first people to be through these Facebook, Google.
Yeah.
One of the first people to be deplatformed and wiped out.
Hmm.
For nothing, for absolutely nothing. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's
And so
been
much of your work's
horrific.
for free. You're just putting out free content for people to learn
Yeah,
and the references with it. So it's like ban him. It's fucked, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I think the
yeah.
more that you're on target,
Aye.
because as I said, this plan is to hide the information. So the last thing that
Mm,
they want is somebody to come digging it up. They don't care who you are. They like it because you're not degreed or whatever. Yeah, but at the end of the day, even that doesn't matter. They've taken down many, many mavericks.
mm,
They've taken down many independent scholars. They're alert to your work, and
mhm.
they'll try this, that, and the other. They try the carrot, and then they try the stick.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, it's terrific.
yeah.
But I just like to
And
keep the focus on the knowledge.
mhm. And so maybe just to try to lay out the macro picture for people that's been following along and on and sort of this vocation sort of journey with it. Our ancient history has been totally rewritten. Our understanding of it is sort of way out of whack. Again, we don't really know how long man goes back into the ancient history with it. We don't know how long these ancient civilizations were. What we can tell is from the structures that they've left, the architecture and some of the mythology, that these were incredibly advanced people with a kind of knowledge that we do not have and still don't know how they made some of these great megaliths. You were saying about then there was this place Atlantis. There was alien visitations as a part of this story, and this is the part of the genetic manipulation of how man might have been created. There was a great war about 12-ish sort of thousand years ago that sort of reset a lot of things. And then this is when you see the dawn of civilization start again. We have the things like agriculture and whatnot. Over these thousands of years, since then, some of these ancient people and their knowledge has been lost or they've been wiped out. People like the Druids you've been speaking about. And there's been this type of control group that's been gaining greater and greater control of the world and of world politics. These are these secret societies. This is this female Illuminati that we sort of went into detail of previously. Um, Part of then their control is again lying about our history and about this war on consciousness. This is maybe something I think we'll dive deep into further in future episodes, but do you want to speak a little bit about the war on consciousness and sort of what's going on as just sort of a macro picture for people keeping up with what this conspiracy work's really about?
Well, of course, once you have split the DNA and you have this
Psychoid
interference
being us.
interference
Yeah,
with our
yeah.
biology, it
Mm,
follows that you now think you own our psychology and our psyche. You don't want the individual knowing why they feel so divided. why they feel so torn within between the emotions and the mind, or whatever it might be, body and spirit, whatever. We are deeply divided beings, and we're in a state of sort of a coma, and they like it that way. Okay? So, but the one thing is, they do know that there's people who the human side of the DNA is stronger than the alien. Remember, I said that the other group has the stronger alien strain, which is cold, ruthless, power hungry, right? Well, look, they know there's the flip side. Every so often, you get people who are really human. And that these guys are going to stir the pot. These guys are going to get out there in their music and their filmmaking and their writing and their poetry and in their art, and they're going to try to awaken their brothers. And they do also know that within that human strain is a will to meaning, a will toward meaning, not just a will toward power. So you got to watch it. And the one thing you don't want is these truth sayers running around, people like Comyns Beaumont and many others I could mention, right? You don't want them in the form of a shaman, so you just wipe out the whole of the indigenous people and get them confused and drunk and all the rest of it, polluted. And you don't want it in any country. So you tear up their roots, you divide them from their ancestors, you fill their head full of subliminal nonsense through advertising in the movies, right? And then, of course, you just educate them from childhood into these disgusting satanic mills. Yeah. So this keeps everyone in a state of ignorance. But at the same time, there's a ritualistic aspect that they are involved in which they do tell you what the hell is going on. But they tell you about it in a right-brained way, using symbolism. This is why it's so peculiar. You see, the dumbing down is not quite what we think it is. But they know that you don't know how to look, that you don't have the keys of decipherment, to work it all out. And they also know that in some people's great spiritual struggle to be free of the webs of the Maya, you can strangle yourself even more. They know this. They've got the whole world order set up, that even those who say, I want to be free above all things, will actually make them laugh loudly because they'll see you strangling yourself in your very attempts to be free. And that's the great game of chess that turns them on. Right? These are the demons who play with us, the gods who swat us for our, their sport. And they play with us like a cat plays with a mouse. But then ever so often, you see, so one can say, okay, well, we've had a lot of enlighteners more coming out, or some people can say, no, it's getting less and less. It's a moot point. We're in a very strange age in which one could say, but you have these Llyod pies, right? You have these William Bramleys. My God, it's all in their books. Michael, I've learned so much from your work, and I never heard of Comyns Beaumont before. So thank you. And you can take it. That's very valid. I get emails every single day of people telling me exactly that. So some good is being done. But at the same time, another pessimistic side of us can go, we're knee deep in, ignorance still. Or why are people voting in these tyrants like Matt Carney and Keir Starmer and all of this, right? Well, what's going on? Haven't we woken up yet? You see? So there's two sides. But the main thing is that their focus is that you are biologically screwed. Right? Yeah. There's been hybridization involved. And this inner conflict is where it really all begins and ends for them. This is the master lever of control. And then they know, other things like your peer groups and socialization and acculturation. And maybe if you know more, you won't want to even step out. I believe you see that there's hundreds, if not even thousands of people who know exactly what we're talking about, but they'll never, ever speak, not even to their own family about this.
Yeah,
Deep thinkers, yeah. I'm sure of it. Deep thinkers, but they don't want the controversy. They just go, look, I'm sticking to my job, get the money, and I'm fucking out of here. I don't want to speak about it. I don't want to let anyone know. I don't have the guts. I have no interest in that at all. I know that. Maybe they
No,
come and
no.
browse what you're doing a little bit, but they're not going to stand up. They're not going to speak. Yeah, they feel that that's suicide. So they stay
Mm.
behind a wall and they never speak. They know it's very, very dangerous.
No, no, I understand, and I've put off making this podcast for a long time.
Really?
It's one of these things, like you're gonna get the backlash at some stage with it, but
Well, that's right. You can be. Oh
we're
yes,
here
you
to
can be
roll. Yeah, yeah,
deplatformed easily. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Goodbye your job, yeah, your
Yes,
cancellation,
yeah,
shunned from society. These are all things that, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you might
We've
have to
got
deal
some
with.
very interesting people who from China
Mm,
who scan everything that the West is producing, even things that like what we're doing, in order to mimic it and throw out their versions of it, which is with the ultimate end of deplatforming the real thing and putting some AI version of it laced with lies, but much flashier,
hmm
more
Yeah,
clicks, hundreds of thousands more clicks within a few days.
yeah,
And you have to
yeah.
have an ear for how they put it together to know it's not authentic. This is not how white people speak. This is not how Western people speak, right? They've slowly colonized social media and put out their versions of it. And you might be fooled into thinking, oh, I love that channel. And you get 2 million hits, 2 million hits or more. How the hell did they do that in such a short time? But people don't think of that. They don't know how it all works today. Every single detail of what the Western mind produces in forms of books, ideas, even down to the very ideas, are all being sampled
hmm
by the
Right.
enemy. Yeah. And then they get their own people, right, to put it out there to cancel us, to cancel the actual creators of the ideas. And then they put more snaz behind it, you know, and then they have a multi-million population who are express purposes to click on it. Not in a genuine way, like you make a podcast and you get genuine viewers coming in. No, no. When these videos go out from the Orient, they have already got millions of people primed, and their job is like a career
hmm
to click on it.
Yeah, called bot farms. Bot
Yes, that's
farms
it.
is
That's right.
the
Yeah,
term of it. Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah,
exactly it. Yeah, that's what I'm talking
yeah.
about. And so
Um,
slowly, slowly, you're marginalized.
mm,
This is how they do it. They've been doing it in other ways for decades. Right? Yeah, the Chinese have been uh, infected all the Japanese Buddhist movements and other movements because how can you tell the difference, right? So they've infiltrated many other Oriental groups that look like they're positive on the surface, and once upon a time they were, but now they're serving a different purpose because they've all been subverted. And by the time they come over here to the West, we can't tell that. We don't know. They just walk right in under the idea of a religious jurisdiction, religious exemption. Yeah, walk right in.
Um, one other something that just came to mind when we were speaking about Atlantis and about sort of the occult. I can't remember if it was H.P. Blavatsky or someone similar I was reading. They were speaking about this root race that you'd mentioned earlier. Is there and that there might have been different types of races of man over time, different generations, so to speak, of races? Is there some sort of occult theme or goal, some sort of sinister goal of creating a new type of race? Is that something that's going on, or something you're familiar with in that kind of literature, or
I never
is
took
that
to it.
off topic?
I never took to
Yeah.
it. I know what you're talking about.
Mm,
And long, long time ago, I did read through it, and other people who've also written on it, like Jocelyn Goodwin and all. It never sang to me. What the part that when we were speaking here about the genetic manipulation, that's how I interpret what she's saying. I would have differences with her there. Rather than talk about root races, in the spiritual sense, in the vertical sense, I speak about it more in this horizontal sense that the human being was hybridized by these alien beings 2, 3 times. That's how I interpret it. I could be wrong. I really could be. But when I read all this, that aspect of Helena Blavatsky's work, yeah, it just did not sing to me. And when I read Zechariah Sitchin, or when I read Brinsley the Poor Trench, when I read William Bramley, some of the people I've just mentioned in this program, that seemed to me to be bang on. Now, I adjusted it, brought in my own ideas, but that to me seemed to be much more sensible. So I just polished it and give it my own backing. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of that part of Blavatsky's work, in which he tries to talk about these 7 root races.
Yes.
I don't know where she got that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm personally not. I don't subscribe to it.
Yeah. One other thing, maybe just when we're on this topic of sort of conspiracies with it and traps that people fall into and sort of this war on consciousness. One of these common conspiracies that come up that I always think so ridiculous is this flat Earth nonsense. And I meet a few people in the comments below. Maybe they want some help or direction with our thoughts on it. Maybe even the best bit of this is we were speaking about the ancients, about the ancient megalithic sites and about the wisdom that they had in them. Like people can look up this episode I did recently with Ralph about Avebury and Stonehenge, and you can clearly see that's what is built into these ancient megalithic sites is a map of the world, of how it is a globe, and about the tilt of the earth, how they knew the tilt of the earth tens of thousands of years ago, and the precession of the equinoxes and all these types of things. This is clearly why flat earth is one of these other nonsenses. But you've been in the conspiracy movement for a long time. When did you see this idea start, this flat earth stuff? And have you any sort of general comments on that?
That might have first come along around 2012 or 13 was when I think somewhere around that time. I just want to forget about it, so because it's such a distraction and so meaningless, and the gormless twats who swallowed it. You just wanted to get as far away from them. It was a distraction. It was a completely psyops distraction. Yeah, it's one of these things again, that was formed in the Orient. This is time specifically in Korea, I think, was the nexus of this conspiracy. There's been several, though. There's been several. Russia generates a lot of these conspiracies, these false leads that get to the internet. Yeah, it's very sophisticated. You have to have a great deal of learning to know that it's bogus when you see it. And then you just have to sit back and wait till it dies out, as it has now, thank goodness. But yeah, it's just more delusion. When and God knows tomorrow they'll unleash something else, because they're desperate to, the controllers realize that people like ourselves have used the internet for good purpose. But if you swamp it with a lot of losers and their imbecilic theories, you'll get millions and millions of hits.
Absolutely. The more ridiculous,
Yes.
it is.
And then this is all planned. It's all the strategy behind it. It's all a psyop. And what that does is it clutters you out. The racket and the noise, and the static and the argy-bargy, and what it does, though, I think, is it shows just how few people are really actually sane in this planet, this world. And what that can do is part of what Yuri Bezmenov talked about is demoralization. People like ourselves who are trying to get a positive message out, when we see the horde of orcs and schmucks, right, out there, wouldn't you want to give up?
I understand. Yeah.
You see? So that's what they want. They're smart enough to demoralize you by saying, look at these people on TikTok, look at these people on OnlyFans, look at these other videos that appear to be philosophical on the surface or somewhat even conspiratorial, and they got 10,000 hits within 2 days. Or 100,000 hits in a month, right? Oh, they got 1 million subscribers. That demoralizes you. Yeah, because they're experts in doing that. They know the sweat and the blood and the poverty that you've gone through to get your stuff out. And so they know that they can impoverish you by not giving you proper stats, even when it comes to earnings. All the things that Ralph talks about. How do you know that you're even selling the number of books that you think you're selling on Amazon or something like that? They can fuck with you in every which way. Keep you poor, keep you demoralized, fuck with the figures, completely deplatform you like they did to me. I was commenting, I put a comment, debunking comment on a flat earth podcast, right? I won't mention on whose, because I don't want to promote the person.
Aye. Yeah.
And then one day, within 2 days, my entire original unslaved channel was destroyed. It was gone.
Right.
Just for making one. Yeah. Just for going after one of these motherfuckers. All right. And that's what every time I got deplatformed, it was because of a comment that I'd made just within 24 to 36 hours on some completely different channel. Right. And yet somehow that triggered They saw it was me, and I lost something. It was like clockwork.
That's
Even after
crazy.
10 years of having no bother.
Mm.
The first moment I went after one of these people that I consider agents and disinformationalists,
Yeah.
suddenly I got cancelled time and time again. I don't want to go into the whole, this is the story of my life. We would never have finished talking about it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No worries.
Unbelievable. Yeah. But this happened.
I've
They're going strong. And then, you can't post again.
yeah, yeah. I know what you mean.
This has happened.
I try to. Some people left links in the comment section of previous videos, and to try to do justice to them, I went and watched some of them. And maybe one of the main things I noticed was when you get very into this conspiracy work, you sort of move away from the crowd, which is something we've spoke a lot about. It's this turning away from the superego. But people still want a group to belong to. And there was something that was very pertinent I'd seen in these flat Earth videos. It was about this sense of community. Oh, we figured it all out. We're now sort of better than all the people that believe all the lies. And it was another little ego trap of here's another wee spiritual game you can just play about. Here's another thing to belong to and who to put your voice out towards other people to speak for you. This kind of thing. But yeah, we'll maybe not delve on it too long. Is there anything else about Atlantis that you think we haven't spoke about you'd like to bring up, Michael, or you think is pertinent to
Well, I
this?
just want to make a quick comment about what you just said.
Oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
knew
Yeah.
some people who were deeply, 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 obsessively into flat Earth. Knew them personally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They were amongst the loneliest people I've ever met. So it connects with what you're saying. Just saying. They were the lonely, pathetically alienated types. Zero friends except some other people online.
Some other flat earthers.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
But in their own life, they were desperately alone, desperately alienated. Yeah. So I don't know. People can make of that what they will. But what was the next part you said?
Was there just anything else about Atlantis that you thought we haven't covered today that you'd like to mention or you think's
Oh,
pertinent?
there's a lot.
Yeah.
We just skimmed the surface, mate.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, we
This is
didn't
the
talk about
quick,
Turkey. This, but
Yeah.
this is the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
This fact that when the original Homeland fell, and whatever races were there, they were already hybridized. This is what made it easy then, for when the historical period opened, we've already got declination. We've already got the weight of devolution. Yeah. By the time, you see, there's not a single person left on the planet that hadn't been hybridized. Anyone from the previous was annihilated during the war. And then the follow-up cataclysms, millions upon millions and millions of millions people killed, and millions of animals. Colossal. People who've read my work on this know that. It's frightful. So the small remnant that was left was in sort of spiritual comatose.
Mm-hmm.
And also now being predated upon, made into slaves, and was predisposed not to listen to any awakeners whose human side, for some strange reason dominated. The other side doesn't really want to listen to them. No, some did, and so they were able to set up more positive civilizations later, right? As the Celtic legends talk about, or the pre-Celtic legends talk about, and we do have this. But then the fights go on, doesn't it? The dark side doesn't want those guys to remain. The dark side doesn't want those guys, their cultures and their civilizations to prosper. And so that's why all over the planet you find ruins like Göbekli Tepe or something else, and there's no people around. They're all dead, all moved on. The people go, I don't know where the people are. The ruins still remain, but the races, or more likely the tribes, seem to have been devastated by something. And sometimes you find these mass graves. In fact, many times you find mass graves nearby. Yeah, because there's been an ongoing disturbance. And then, as my books also talk about, which a lot of these other people never talk about, my book's almost unique for this part, is the psychological trauma inherited from the cataclysm, which went very deep because part of our human side is connected to nature and connected to the earth. So when the earth erupted around us with such tumult, That also made a fracture that I make central to my work. But the fact that that psychological trauma exists as a burning wound right in the center of the psyche is capitalized upon by the dark side and is probably the most important weapon of the historical age. Their knowledge that we are deeply, we have an antipathy, what I call an antipathy to the natural order, buried deep, deep, deep down within, a suspicion of it. On this fundamental level, they have made hay out of. It's the number one red file. It's the big file that they can pull out. And since the Earth often still does, has done since those years, risen up with your tsunamis and your earthquakes and volcanoes and whatever, right? I mean, Ralph, you have talked about Thera, Santorini, and that's just one of many, many. So we're already disconnected umbilically from the Earth, because once when it did what it did, and it killed so many millions of people, that's written in our own unconscious. So yes, I'm glad you asked me that last question, because no study of this subject, none, makes sense without this piece. And I'm one of the only people who speak about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I was put onto it.
trauma.
I was put onto it by a great man who wrote a book called Past Shock. Right? Jack Barringer. He's not around anymore. Great guy, lovely guy. And he had written a very thin book dealing with a few themes called Past Shock. And one line in his book I read, and it changed my life. One line. This is, again, this does happen. In which he briefly mentioned that ancient man, when he saw this tumult, he wasn't sitting back in some fucking armchair watching it. And I realized, oh my God, this is where this is the part that interests me, right? Rather than the story of catastrophe in terms of geology and a physical objective event, here is where the man, Jack Barringer, helped me to see where the psychological tie-in. What did it do to our psyches? And from that, got into more the Manuel Velikovsky's and started to unpack this. Can't think of Earth trauma and think about man's psyche being unaffected. On the contrary. And so this is another thread that you need to braid in with the whole story of the the hybridization process. That's a form of trauma. That traumatized us. Just having our DNA fucked with. That is a central trauma as well. But the one of nature, doing something hostile to us, has thrown us for a loop. And instead of being allowed to heal it, the dark side, the controllers have made absolutely sure to keep tugging at that rug, to keep rekindling and rekindling and rekindling our antipathy to nature. It's done in very subtle ways, but it's done. Yeah. And just a simple deforestation, right? All this Green Party stuff, this climate gate stuff, right? That they're always dragging out, the world forums and these things, right? All of this is all done for this purpose. It's nothing to do with love of the earth or trying to change the earth or better the earth or anything like that. No, it's all to stimulate and reawaken our guilty feelings and shame feelings and psychological destabilization regarding the earth. That's what it's done. It's not meant to look like that, right? But that's what it amounts to. But what they do is they are able to bamboozle caring people, right? These are the useful idiots who actually genuinely caring for animals and for nature start wearing the rainbow flag, start, going out. There's endless amount of those people who have no idea what we've just talked about. And they join the crowd. They join those organizations. They listen to Al Gore and they listen to the World Economic Forum, and all of this, Prince Charles, King Charles, right? They listen to all those jokers because they have no idea what's going on, that there's a deep set, really down on the genetic level, immense conflict raging within the psyche, deep below the veil of the unconscious. And one of the ways that the puppeteers control our asses is through this deep set anxiety. Yeah, it's really it's a whole study in itself of how they do this, but they do it. But it's difficult to understand until you've read your Velikovskys properly, and my work, because I make it absolutely central, the connection between Earth catastrophe and personal trauma, social trauma. This is a key one in the arsenal of the controllers. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems to be this split in the psyche. This is it's these guys recreating the kind of trauma that reverberates back that sort of sets this off. And so you see so much of the modern conspiracy is about denial of the body and being able to move away from yourself and separating you from nature and these kind of cities and how they're designed and whatnot, and about the poisoning of the food, and all of these things are a bigger part of it, because it essentially it quiets the voice of the self and makes the voice of the crowd louder. And this is what I think the key sort of methodology they use to psychologically manipulate us. It's in that. It's about quieting the voice of the self, removing you from nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is
get you incarcerated in these urban gulags. Get you stuck up against other people that you may have absolutely fucking nothing in common with. Cut the trees, cut the hedges, butcher all nature, butcher animals. It's been going on for centuries. Centuries. They denude the countryside. Yeah. And they make you, and they're working on this internal fear. Or the next best thing is, no, you can go to nature, but go to bungee jump, go to jog. Okay? Yeah, what are you talking about? You can go and surf. You're part of nature. Yeah. Leave your trash everywhere. Leave your the ropes at the climbers. They just leave the fucking ropes and the pins there. They're facing these beautiful places. Yeah. Just drive your car, go on big long lines through Yosemite. You'll love it. But it's on a recreational level. It's not born out of anything holistic. You're not really in nature as nature. You're in it as a fucking theme park, a glorified theme park, like you take the kids down to, the big wheel. Mm-hmm. Or Disney World. That's what nature has been. So nature's been reduced to a theme park. That's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. And have you any other thoughts on what the indigenous people here were like prior to the manipulation? Obviously, I don't know where you would get the information from, but have you any sort of inklings or understandings of what ancient peoples might have been like, or what the indigenous humans were before this?
Yeah, but I haven't written about it. Yeah, don't want to go there.
We'll leave it there for now. Yeah,
it's enough of a focus to think of what happened afterwards.
Yes, yeah, that's fair enough with it. We're coming up to an hour and 45, Michael. Any other last little comments, and we'll maybe wrap it up here for another week?
Well, I would definitely build a little library. Go to my work first. I've got the
yes,
names.
I'll share the website.
Yeah, I've got the names. Even on that document we talked about, Appendix 1, there is a book list. And at Appendix 10, the last one, is a library, which I mentioned all the books, or some of the books that I think are very relevant. But I would certainly put Gods of Eden by William Bramley at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. So if you're into my work, then back it up by William Bramley, Gods of Eden. I swear by that book. And, just pick and choose some of the other ones that you read. I would definitely read John Keel's two books, right? Our Haunted Planet and The Eighth Tower. And especially if you're dealing with newbies who know absolutely nothing about this, and all they maybe know some crap on ancient aliens, right? Read those two books. And then Colin Wilson's amazing book, The Occult, is absolutely phenomenal, because those are mind expanding. When it comes to, they're written in the spirit of Charles Fort, but they're written much more clearly than he did. His books are very sort of chaotic and journalistic. These other books I think are superior, and I quote from them, in my work as well. And this will help open your minds. But if you're reading the Atlantis book, make sure you use this page where my appendixes have been there, because there's a huge amount of information I couldn't put in the book, in there. And then the last thing I'll say is, at the end of the book, Atlantis book, in the actual book itself, is Val Valerian's Master Chronology. And one has to sit and just take the time to read that. It's a part of it's appendix in the book at the end called the Master Chronology. And I was given permission to put it in there. Wow. Right. If you are a skeptic or you're dealing with skeptical people, just read them that.
I'll check
And
that
you
out.
will never, ever again disbelieve that there's some hidden hand, a conspiratorial hand at work. And this will then enlighten you as to why things are the way they are in the world, how the game has been played in a more practical way. Because a lot of things we've talked about have been very esoteric, but you also need the counterbalancing, practical, everyday understanding of where the money came from, where the power comes from, what are the corporations, how have they used it in times, maybe centuries ago, how did it build its power? That master chronology is frickin' eye-opening. So pick up the book and just read that, if nothing else.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'll share your webpage here, Michael, just for people can see it as well, also know where to find this. And so you can find this again on michaeltesarion.com/Atlantis book. Again, people can find the book on the Amazon page. Make sure to check it out. And then if you scroll down, this is where you will see the appendices you're mentioning. So Appendix 1, this pre-Diluvian civilizations and catastrophism. And there's a number of other different appendices people can read through and check out there for sure.
Good.
And you've lots of quotes down there below as well also. And any last words, Michael? Or we'll wrap her up.
No, man, thank you very much. We've done a great job. I love talking about this subject.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's so inclusive. Yeah, and I love putting these names out. Oh, yeah, I would even say Arctic Homeland in the Vedas. Get that by Tilak. Arctic Homeland in the Vedas. Very important book. We did an early People Who Are Enslaved. Can type that title in, Arctic Homeland in the Vedas. We did one of the earliest podcasts we ever did on Enslaved is that. So again, it features a lot in my work, even my Path of the Fool 22 series.
Cards of the Tarot.
Yeah. 22 programs in that alone. We talk about this fairly frequently in that. I would definitely pick up that book because you've been handed so much junk about the Indian contribution, and Indians will always, be waxing lyrical about these books that they say are central to their culture. But as a matter of fact, sorry, they come from completely different peoples, different caste. And so you want to be straight on that. This comes from a very great people whose homelands, right, were wrecked, but they come from the Northwest. So, and this one Indian man did the right job to prove it and speak the truth. One amongst how many millions, billions even?
I think there's a billion now.
Yeah. So just realize the preciousness of that work. Highly recommend.
Check that one out.
Oh, for God's sake, please. Yeah.
Brilliant. And so I thank you very much again, Michael. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for chatting to us about Atlantis. It's such an interesting topic. Hopefully people have found it very interesting. I'm sure they would have. And so, yes, thank you everybody else. Please check out Unslaved. Check out all Michael's links. They'll be down below. Thank you once more for stopping by. And please like and subscribe. Again, it really helps this new channel keep growing. So thank you once again, and we'll see you all next time. Cheers. Thanks, Michael.